Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their diverse stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. Now, on to today's episode, where Jonathan Domsky joins us to discuss his experiences as an autistic entrepreneur. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
There's nowhere I'd rather be right now than with you, Doug. Looking forward to it.
Well, it's always great to have a conversation with you. And I'd love to start this conversation by learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
Oh yeah. Well, it's kind of recent. I was lucky enough to remarry about 6 months ago, and I have three wonderful stepchildren who I've come to love. They all have a lot going on, and the youngest in particular, his name is Eli. He's 12, almost 13. Eli has a lot of bad days. He's severe ADHD. He has something called conduct disorder, real impulse control issues. He would have been murdered long ago if it weren't for modern ADHD meds. But he also has a lot of self-awareness. And about 4 months ago, he asked his mom, he asked my bride, does she think that he's autistic? And she and I were talking about it that afternoon. And first I was a little dismissive, not because I don't think he's autistic. I don't know if it's a clinical definition, but he certainly has strong, strong autistic tendencies. But he's Eli. Like, we know what his challenges are. Labels aside, like, what do we need to do to support him? And I was thinking about challenges I had, when I was his age. And I told my wife, I'm not neurodiverse, but I've literally known since I was 3 years old that I think differently than other people. And she looks at me and she's like, oh, you're neurodiverse. I'm like, okay, whatever. It's not a word I've ever thought, to use for myself, but fine, neurodiverse. But it's not like I have a diagnosable thing. I don't have ADHD. I'm not autistic. And she looks at me and she's like, are you sure? So I said, I'm 100% sure I don't have ADHD, the opposite of that. But we Google, what are the traits of Asperger's? And Doug, I have every single one of them. It was just check, 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 check. And I'm like, okay. Wasn't expecting the conversation to go here, but, here we are. And for the first couple of weeks, I had a measure of dissonance, partly because I don't like labels, which I've since learned is a very common autistic trait, but also just trying to figure out how to communicate it in a way that connects more than creates distance and that clarifies more than causes confusion, because there's just so many misconceptions about what autism is and what it isn't. But then I totally embraced it. And I educated myself. I've read over 15 books on this subject. I've been reinterpreting all of my life stories through the lens of autism. It just makes so much more sense. And then reaching out to people, finding community. And that's what led me to getting in touch with you.
Yeah, and we initially connected as you had reached out wanting to have conversations specifically with autistic entrepreneurs. How many autistic entrepreneurs have you talked to up to this point? And what have you learned from our collective experiences?
So first, I just want to say it wasn't easy. I spun my wheels for about 2 months before I was able to meet anyone. I know very few, or at least prior to this last 4 months, I knew very few autistic people. I just didn't know where to find them because it's not something that most people advertise. But once I figured it out, in LinkedIn I've gotten some personal introductions, but LinkedIn is where I've, found that most people. Probably reached out to about 30 autistic entrepreneurs, another couple dozen professionals in the space, therapists like yourself and coaches, and, ADHD, there's executive functioning coaches, that sort of thing. And what I've discovered is that it's a lonely journey. Everyone is figuring this out for themselves. Of the 30 people I talked to, I think there's 2 who are diagnosed as children. Everyone else figures it out as an adult, often through the experience of a child or working with some other autistic person. And as a child, for better or worse, there's all these resources. As an adult, you just have to figure it out by yourself. And it's hard enough for most autistic people to connect in the first place. there's such a hunger to meet other people like ourselves. And good luck meeting another autistic entrepreneur unless you're a weirdo like me who, makes it his life's mission, to figure it out and to find us. So yeah, what I've learned is that it's a lonely journey. People are figuring out themselves. Desperately want community. And then separately, the vast majority of autistic entrepreneurs don't know they're autistic. If we had somehow met 6 months ago and you had said, "Hey, Jonathan, you ever consider that you're on the spectrum?" I'd say, "Why no, Doug? Why do you ask?" But if you had said, "Well, is this the only conversation you know how to have? You know, deep one on one, talking about real stuff, and do groups kind of stress you out and make you anxious?" I'd say, "Yeah." And if you said, "Well, do you have sensory sensitivities? Sensitive to light and sound and texture and scent?" I'd say, "Yeah." "Where are you going with this, Doug?" And then the vast majority who do know don't like to talk about it because there's a stigma. I've always loved the way that I think, but people I'm meeting are at all different ends of that spectrum, not just the autism spectrum, but that spectrum of fully embracing who they are and having some real challenges with who they are and what that means.
Now, I imagine, and I could be wrong, but one of the reasons that you reached out to entrepreneurs is you are one yourself. You provide business and life coaching for entrepreneurs. So, from what I understand, you like to work on an entrepreneur's lives beyond their work, kind of a holistic approach. Can you tell us what you've seen taking this approach to support people in regards to the businesses they run?
Yeah. So we don't have a business life and a personal life. Doug, we just have one life. The only question is, where do we allocate our time, our resources, our focus? And it's exhausting working against yourself. And the main difference between entrepreneurs and, everyone who's not an entrepreneur is that, lots of people identify with their, with their careers. But, not as a, if you work in a corporate job and you lose that job, it's of course it's an ego blow. It's a financial challenge, but then, you find another job and, most people kind of land on their feet. As an entrepreneur, if you lose your job, there's a pretty good chance you're going to lose your house because you probably have a business loan and, your house is collateral for it. So the stakes are a lot higher. And these same traits that we have at home are the same traits that we bring in our work lives. And so many of us as entrepreneurs, we read books, we listen to podcasts, we find that we want to know what's the rule book, what's the playbook, like how do we become successful? And the playbook's the playbook for a reason. Like you do the things in the playbook, and you're very likely to be successful. But if the person who wrote those rules, wrote those strategies, doesn't think like you, then it's exhausting to work against yourself. Um, we do all these things because we think we have to. Just a quick, example. So at my other company, we topped out at 28 employees, and I have very low social needs. I do not need to hang out with, employees. And if I do, I want to do it one-on-one. But, my staff, they needed off-site activities. They needed to go bowling or have drinks after work, and they needed to have all company meetings where they could just, have meals together. I don't need that, but I recognize that they did. So early in my career, well, early in my business, I just didn't do it at all, but that hurt company culture and morale. Later on, I recognized that they needed this, and I would mask. I would show up and I'd pretend to be having a good time. Like not a not a large group person, and they got what they needed, but I didn't get what I needed. And eventually, I learned to design my relationships, my strategies, my environments to actually fit the way that I think. And I found a super social, outgoing employee. And I said, "You are in charge of organizing all of our company events." And she did a fantastic job. Then I had her find everybody's birthday and everybody's work anniversary. And every 2 weeks, we'd have an all company lunch meeting. And I'd come 5 minutes before it. And I'd have, I'd talk with people briefly. And then we'd have our company meeting. And then we'd celebrate, the saying happy birthday and happy anniversary and all that stuff. And I'd give a talk on what was going on in the company, what's next. Only when I discovered to actually design the business around how I think did I have more energy, have more joy, and but really learned to love the business that I had created. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. I'm really terrible about our team's birthdays and anniversaries. It just never crosses my mind. I don't know how important that
Your
is.
agenda, but it's on. It's not on your agenda, but it's on theirs.
Yeah.
And part of being a good leader is making sure everybody gets what they need in order to be a part of the whole and to fulfill the mission of the organization. But what you need is different than what your employees need. So how could you give it to them without losing yourself? That's the design challenge. And with just a little bit of intention, it's usually pretty easy to find a way.
Now, prior to coaching, you co-founded Kidorable, which produces fun, practical, and unique children's accessories. Kidorable's products have been sold in over 5,000 stores in over 20 countries and have also appeared in People and on the Today Show. However, you decided to step away in 2020 to pursue business coaching. So, for those that are thinking about transitioning in their career, can you talk about what you considered in making this decision?
I'll tell you the story and then some things that I think will be valuable to anyone who is thinking about running their own business. It's not for everybody, but if it's for you, well, there's just nothing better. So, Doug, if you had asked me 20 years ago, am I passionate about my business? I would have told you yes. But if you had asked me, does selling fun, practical, unique children's accessories make my heart sing? I'd say, no, not really. I'd learned how to be an inspiring manager and an efficient administrator and entrepreneur and how to run a business and all that sort of stuff. But the highlight of my week was the 10 or so hours that I would spend in meetings. I love meetings because good meetings, that's where problems are solved. That's where I get to help people accomplish their goals. What's better than that? They come in frustrated and confused. They leave with, clarity and inspiration. And I designed my entire work life around meetings. I led our morning daily huddle. I led a 15-minute after lunch customer service training meeting, weekly sales training meeting, weekly management accountability meeting, quarterly strategic planning meetings. We topped out at 28 employees. I had 2-hour quarterly reviews with every single staff member, helping them accomplish their goals inside and outside of the company. And after a couple decades, the company was pretty highly optimized. I was working from home 2 hours a day, coming to the office once a week for face-to-face meetings. That's another story of designing your environment. But I was looking for some other way to express my entrepreneurial energies. And it was a single day. It was January 31st, 2020, before anyone heard of what COVID was. And I took a walk from my home near Lake Michigan up to the lake and the Northwestern University campus just to clear my head, process the week. It's a walk I had taken hundreds of times. But this day, as soon as the water came into view, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. It was like I was riding an avalanche. I was literally unsteady. I needed to sit down. And I just realized in an instant, I can't keep devoting my work energy to something that doesn't light me up. I was born to be a coach. I love to learn. I'm great at teaching the world needs people with clarity on who they are and how to get there. And I took a 2-hour walk, cleared my head, came back, talked to my partner about me exiting the company to become a full-time coach. And Doug, it's just the best decision I've ever made. If it was merely work I was born for, and it would be a bright spot. But because of what I do is I help people get clarity on, who they are, where they're going, how to get there, and how to have a life and a business that feels more effortless, more meaningful, more joyous. And especially that first year, there were 50 times where I'd be on a call with a client talking maybe for the third or fourth time that week about alignment with purpose and values, how to design those environments, those relationships, those strategies to actually fit the way that you think, to remove obstacles that are in front of you, to, and most importantly, the obstacles that are inside our heads in the form of self-limiting beliefs. And I would think in the back of my mind, oh, Jonathan, there's that part of your life that's out of alignment. You should do something about that. And I did. And it's worked out all my fears, all my misalignments. They're all gone. I had this elevated feeling of well-being ever since. For people who are listening, who are thinking, I'd love to find what I was born for. I would love to do that too. Um, Being an entrepreneur really just requires three things. And if you have these three things, like there's a very good chance that you would make a good entrepreneur. If you don't have these three things, then it's probably not for you. Are you willing to do things differently? Businesses that are the same don't thrive. And one of the nice things about being neurodiverse is that almost by definition, you think differently than other people in the room. So it allows us to just find new models, new ways of doing things, to find market opportunities that, neurotypical people miss. The second one is to understand what the job description of an entrepreneur is. For a regular job, you're hired for what you know. As an entrepreneur, your job is to figure it out. I know almost no one who has started their own business and was qualified to do the job that they created for themselves. So the job is to figure it out, not just to know what you have to do. And then the third, and we touched on this, is accepting that your personal well-being and career are inextricably linked as an entrepreneur. That it's hard to turn it off when when you come home from work, if your job is your business. I'll share this one more thing. There's a beautiful quote. It's attributed to Goethe, German writer and philosopher. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. But if you fit those three criteria and you have an idea, just don't wait till you're ready. Just start now and figure it out.
You were talking about meetings, and I have a love-hate relationship with meetings. I love meetings
Yeah.
when I can work with people to solve problems. I hate meetings because I think most of the time that doesn't occur and they're not accessible to me. So I'm wondering what makes a meeting maybe accessible to you or gives you a feeling before or after you leave the meeting, like a good feeling about that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. Everyone hates bad meetings. It's the good meetings that are so worthwhile. And in our main company, I promised my employees that our time together meetings would be their most productive hour of their entire week. And especially for salespeople, they did not believe it. They hated it. They're like, why would I be in a meeting when I could be selling? Like, especially if there's a commission component, you're taking money out of their pockets. But so great meetings start on time, they end on time. There's an agenda, and that's actually relevant. It makes sense. And at the end of the meeting, everyone's clear with what's their takeaway, what do they need to do, what are they going to be held accountable for when they leave. Meeting structure is magic. The meetings that every company should have is a daily huddle, which lasts about 5 minutes. It's a standing meeting. You're literally standing. Even if you're doing it virtually, make people stand up because you don't want them to get too comfortable and start talking about the weekend and their dog. I mean, maybe there's a place for that before the meeting or after the meeting, but during the meeting, the agenda is as simple as, what did you say you were going to do yesterday? What did you actually do? What are you planning on doing today? Is there anything that you're expecting to happen later in this week that affects anyone else? And where are you stuck? And everybody spends a minute talking about their things. If there's something more in depth, you talk about it one-on-one after the meeting. For the management accountability meeting, once a week for an hour, pretty much the same agenda. What did you say you were going to do last week? What did you actually do? What are you planning on doing next week? And for your goals, they should be written out with milestones. Are you on track? If you are on track, awesome. What do you need to do to stay on track? And if you're not on track, what do you have to do to get on track? These meetings are magic, Doug. They take the heavy lifting of accountability, which so many entrepreneurs find hard to do because it's really awkward just to say out of the blue, hey, Doug, are you on track for that project? And then you feel like, what are you micromanaging me? Do you not trust me? But if it's on the agenda, you're supposed to talk about it. The meeting structure itself takes care of all that accountability. For our salespeople, our sales training meetings, one deficit that I know that I had when I was running my company is that I was slow to praise people. Because, if we're talking right now and you have a mustard stain on your shirt, I'm just not the kind of guy who's going to say, Doug, great job keeping 99% of your shirt clean. I'm going to say, Doug, let's talk about that mustard stain. And as a manager, my staff would work really hard on a project and they would do great work, A plus. And I'd spend 10 seconds talking about what was good. And we'd spend the rest of the hour talking about the 1%. We talked about the mustard seed. And it was very demoralizing for my staff. And when I realized I was doing this, I just added structure to the agenda. And we started every meeting by asking, tell me about your success story from the previous week. And that gave them a chance to share, to shine. And it gave me a chance to praise them because it was on the agenda, was supposed to do it. And then if there was a multiple person meeting, I would say like, oh, Doug, that's a fantastic idea. I love that you did that. Hey, all these other people in the meeting, like, you do that too? Because I kind of think we all should. Like, let's put this into the standard operating procedure. Let's put this in the SOP and I'll learn from Doug. The next question I would ask is, what were your frustrations from the last week? And there's three kinds of frustrations. One is just bad luck. I wanted to go and have a picnic, but it was raining. I'm frustrated about that. Okay, I'd rather have them complaining in the meeting than outside of the meeting and ruining our culture. The next kind of frustration is they're missing some information. They spent 4 hours figuring something out when it should have taken 15 minutes. Let me show you how. But the best kind of frustration, like my favorite, is when it revealed some sort of friction in the system. And then I would say, let me think about that one. And I'd come back the next week with a solution, change to how I do things. And we had 30 of these a year. And every single year, I would save them 5 to 10 hours of productive work. Add 5 to 10 hours of productive work to their work schedule, because I got rid of all the stuff that was slowing them down and frustrating them. So that's how those meetings became the most productive hour of the week for our salespeople.
Now, since you learned fairly recently about your autism, what do you hope to continue to learn about your autistic experience?
The number one thing is building community. I talked about how for almost everybody who I'm talking to, they're the only one. They're the only person that they know. So my first, goal, the first thing that I'm looking forward to is meeting more autistic entrepreneurs. And if there's anyone listening, if you build something significant and you are an autistic entrepreneur, please reach out. I'd love to hear your story. I started my own podcast last month, The Pattern Seeking Entrepreneur, where I interview just people who have autistic entrepreneurs who have built something. I interviewed you, Doug. Your episode will be posting in the next few weeks. I love hearing these stories, and every time I do, I learn something new. Whether it's something big, whether it's something small. I interviewed a woman a couple of weeks ago. She has some energy management issues, which I could certainly relate to. Every day at lunch, she takes a bath. I I think that's brilliant. I think it's fantastic. I love just learning little things like that. Like, oh, what a great way to manage your energy. If you have a stressful morning, you need to recharge, just take a bath in the middle of the day. Reading all these books. There's not a week that goes by where I don't learn something new about myself or have a deeper understanding. I read in a book, it's about a month ago, that the woman who wrote the book said that she's blind to the context needs of others. And, what do they need to have a satisfying answer to a question? And as soon as I read that, I'm like, oh my God, me too. Like, I'm blind to the context needs of others. My friends, my family, they lovingly tease me about, I love context. My son, he's 17 years old now, but when he was 7, I remember he asked me what caused World War II. And I gave him like a half-hour answer. It was like, well, before you could understand what caused World War II, first you have to understand World War I. And before you can understand World War I, we have to talk about imperialism, of course. And before you can understand imperialism, you have to understand the Industrial Revolution and the Age of Discovery. And before that, you have to discover, about Columbus, all this stuff. He just wanted to hear the words Pearl Harbor. And when I learned this, not just that I love context, but that I really don't understand what someone else needs to have a satisfying answer. I started asking people when they ask me a question, do you want the 1 sentence answer, the 2 minute answer, or the 10-minute answer? They almost always say the 1 sentence answer. And I say, that's not an option. I'll give you the 2 minute answer, because Pearl Harbor, I'd rather not even tell them. It's just, it's so unsatisfying. The last thing I'll say is starting a WhatsApp community for autistic entrepreneurs, a place to find your neurokin, people with whom you have neurological kinship, a place there is no need for masking, to share your story, inspire and be inspired. This place to call home. And so many of the people I've talked to, they're so eager for that kind of community, that kind of belonging.
And lastly, Jonathan, how can our listeners learn about you beyond this interview?
Yeah, the easiest place would be my website, www.untangled-coaching.com. Don't forget the dash. Or look for me on LinkedIn, Jonathan Domsky. I'm the only one. And I assume it'll be in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, Jonathan, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories. I'm sure we will be talking again very soon. Thanks so much to Jonathan for the conversation. To learn more about Jonathan, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you after listening to this episode on how can leaders give other people what they need without losing themselves in the process. Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to be the best version of their authentic selves through customized life coaching. We also support parents and partners of autistic people by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. So please visit autismpersonalcoach.com to begin your experience of judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.